remember to turn on all notifications so you don't miss a video. Attack on Titan is an exceptional story, but like all stories, it has its flaws. It is impossible to write a perfect story because not only is it impossible to please everyone, but to gain one thing, an author must sacrifice another. In early AOT, Hajime Isayama chooses to sacrifice his characters for the sake of the setting and plot. AOT has an apocalyptic setting. Because of the setting, humans in the walls can only really have two goals: survive or fight. Some characters like Armin or Hanji are given unique goals, but the same can't be said for most of the cast. A lack of unique goals makes the characters bleed together and feel indistinct. Plus, the early story treats humanity as one character. Apart from people like Eren, a Titan shifter, or Erwin, a leader, the individual uniqueness and decisions of a character don't matter that much. Little character-driven scenes are cool but aren't necessary for the progression of the plot, and could be removed without making much of a difference. All characters without special roles could be cardboard cutouts or have no personality, and the early story would mostly work the same way. The second cause of this dilemma is the lightning-fast plot. The plot often moves so fast that it doesn't have much time to develop the characters. After starting with a short 2-chapter flashback, the plot dives right into the action-packed Battle of Tross, where the Colossal Titan attacks and starts a whole battle against Titans. Eren turns into a Titan, his humanity is questioned, and he uses this power to plug the hole in the wall. This lasts for 13 chapters. A short flashback of the members' time training to join the Corps is shown for 5 chapters, but then it's right back into the fast-paced plot with the female Titan arc, which lasts for 16 chapters. So much happens in such a short amount of time, which is great for the plot, but not so great for the supporting cast. The advantage of these traits is obviously a rollercoaster type story with loads of action and entertainment, which is what made it such a hit. The disadvantage is that the quality of the characters is sacrificed. The only way to solve this problem would be to abandon the apocalypse setting faster, or to have mini arcs early on to develop the characters. I personally really enjoy what we got, so while I think these flaws aren't excusable, I also believe that they were acceptable drawbacks in order to get an amazing ride that was early AOT. Because of the prioritization of the plot, the characters are severely handicapped in comparison to other stories, but some characters do manage to stand out and be well written, and this is usually due to ideals that tell us about the character developing backstories, honorable or respectable actions and decisions, and character arcs. For example, Eren and Jean have conflicting ideologies in the first flashback about how their lives should be lived, which leads to them actually fighting one another. During the training, Annie goes into detail on her ideology and how she wants to live her life. She also has her speech to the military police about good and bad people. Levi has his iconic speech to Eren about not knowing what the right decision is. For development through backstories, Armin and Mikasa have flashbacks that are integral to their character, while Annie explains parts of hers. For actions and decisions, during the Trust arc, Mikasa shows composure and leads soldiers. Armin makes a smart plan that results in the team's survival. Jean takes a leadership role to get his group to safety. Levi makes a promise to his dying ally, and Armin is able to convince humanity that Eren is an ally after he shows his Titan abilities. For actions and decisions, Reiner selflessly helps Armin during the training, and Erwin and Levi save Eren in court. For character arcs, Jean, who was hellbent on joining the MPs, decides to join the Survey Corps instead, not wanting to see Marcos fit again. Most of these characters I mentioned were the ones that I actually enjoyed. My only problem is Mikasa. Although I dislike when a character revolves around another, hers was somewhat excusable because her backstory reveals that she owes her life to Eren and wants to protect him. My problem arises when this sense of duty starts being mixed in with romance and she tries to control his life, like when she snitches on him or breaks up his fight with John. Those don't look like actions of someone who owes their life to someone. While these characters would never measure up to those in a more freer story, they were still good for AOT, but this wasn't capitalized upon. Bland and one-note characters like Sasha, Coney, Bertold, and more could have been made more interesting by giving them the traits I mentioned, making a larger percentage of the cast enjoyable. In conclusion, Attack on Titan sacrifices the quality of its characters in order to nail the setting and plot early on in the story. Thorfinn's arc is one of my favorite parts of Vinland Saga, but there is a glaring flaw with it. I'll start with the good. The first thing that it does very well is the foreshadowing. Whether you read the manga or watch the anime, Thorfinn's backstory is told very early on. In this flashback, Thor tells his son that no one is his enemy, attempting to pass down his own pacifist mentality. Furthermore, when Thor fights Ashelot, he refuses to kill him and tries to get out of the situation without killing anyone, but this doesn't work. In the present, Thorfinn wants revenge against his father's killer. Because of this flashback, we as an audience realize that Thorfinn is going against his father's message, so he can make two conclusions. Either his father was wrong, or Thorfinn will eventually agree with his father. And since this is a historical story based on someone traveling to America, It is very unlikely that the story will be about revenge. Since we have the foreshadowing that Thorfinn will become a pacifist, it isn't a disappointing twist when he's unable to get his revenge. If the flashback was not shown, we would have felt cheated because the story would have been heavily hinting that he would get his revenge. This gladly wasn't the case. The next thing it does well is Thorfinn's point A. He starts the story as an angry and vengeful warrior who will do anything to get a chance at killing Ashalad, even joining his crew and working for him. We also understand why he's at point A thanks to the flashback. The extent of his hatred and lack of morality is shown very well throughout the first arc. Vinland Saga also gets point B down very well. Thorfinn becomes a pacifist, very reminiscent of his father. He wants to make up for all the lives he's killed by creating a place where the amount of lives that will be born outweigh the lives he's taken. He also refuses to kill and always tries to find a way to solve a problem peacefully. He uses his words, and combat is his last solution. Following his father's footsteps, he also no longer uses weapons most of the time. This Thorfinn is very inspirational and mature, but there's one glaring problem with it. In a good character arc, a character starts at point A, which is a character trait that usually defines them. Then they have an experience that causes them to change, which I'll call event A. After event A, they move to point B, which is usually the opposite trait of point A. That is the formula for a basic character arc. Thorfinn has point A and B, but no event A. At the end of the first arc, Thorfinn sees Ashalad killed by Canute and flies into a rage, attacking the new king. Because of this, he's punished by becoming a slave off-screen. The next time we see him, he's a slave on a farm, but he is completely mellowed out, and the first time we see him experience conflict, he already has the pacifist mindset. This is the problem with his arc. We don't see the event A. All three sections of the character arc are necessary for making a good arc, but Thorfinn is missing one. We have no clue why he suddenly decided to follow his father's footsteps. We can headcanon that he just had time to think it over, but not only is this assumption not a satisfying answer, but it could also not even be the case. Maybe there was a specific event that caused him to change. This is never really said or hinted at. Even if I'm missing a piece of dialogue that speaks on this, I think a scene is necessary for such a monumental part of the story. This could have been a really impactful moment in the story if done right, and would arguably be the most important scene in the story because it completely changed the course of the story and the way it was told. In conclusion, Thorfinn's character arc is almost perfect, but it's missing the necessary event A that pushes Thorfinn from point A to point B. Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 was amazing. If the story ended there and the anime got a faithful adaptation, it probably would have been one of my top 10 anime/manga. The way that final arc was handled was full of great writing, but the start of Part 2, Tokyo Ghoul Re, was extremely disappointing. The first reason is that Kaneki, our protagonist, was reset. He had a very compelling arc in Part 1 that involved him transforming from an emotional and whiny half-ghoul who was more in touch with his human side, to a cold and vicious half-ghoul who was more in touch with his ghoul side. The problem with Re is that it starts off by erasing Kaneki and all of his development and replacing it with Heisei. This puts an extremely long pause on the great development for the protagonist that has been built up and that the audience has come to be invested in. Heisei has his own development, but he is a much less interesting character with a much less interesting arc. Kaneki's arc is put on hold for too long, but it doesn't stop there. The story also got rid of a lot of the supporting cast in Part 1 and replaced them with new ones. Everyone from Anteku does very little and barely appears. Yoshimura, Enji, and Kaya don't appear. Nishiki has a short fight in the beginning and then disappears. Toka and Yomo have a quick appearance at the shop but don't have any action. For Kaneki's personal group, Tsukiyama appears around the beginning of the 5th arc, but he doesn't really do anything noteworthy. Hinami appears with Ayato in a raid for a short amount of time. Banjo only appears in the 6th arc. For the CCG, Akira and Suzuya are the only two that remain important. Amon and Takizawa initially disappear. Amon comes back every now and then, while Takizawa was a major antagonist in the 5th arc. Akira and Suzuya do appear pretty frequently, but there are many more important characters that are skipped that these two are not enough. Instead, the story decides to focus on the Quinks, which is a squad of entirely new characters, and just like Heisei, they are less interesting than what we had before. There are two comparisons I want to make to Re's character reset. The first is Tokyo Ghoul in post-Awagiri Tree, and the second is Attack on Titan in the Marley arc. Both arcs changed up the main group of characters, but they did things that allowed the switch to be successful. For the Ghoul arc, Kaneki makes his team of Hinami, Tsukiyama, and Banjo. The first advantage is that the protagonist doesn't get replaced. The second is that the author chooses characters that have been in the story for some time. Banjo was introduced the arc before, but Hinami and Tsukiyama were introduced in the 3rd and 4th arc respectively. The only characters that were more important were Toka and Nishiki, so the amount of sideline characters was minimal. Titan's arc is more similar to Tokyo Ghoul Re's start, The Marley arc gets rid of the old cast and replaces them with a new one. The first advantage is that our perspective character is one that we already know, Reiner. While most of the other characters are new, we at least have someone to connect to. In Ri, our perspective character is Heisei. He may have Kaneki's body, but he's not Kaneki. The second advantage is that the story quickly shifts back to the main group in the same arc. Eren and the Survey Corps regain their spots as the main group towards the end of the arc, and they keep that position for the rest of the story. The short shift was just used to develop some new characters and make the weight of the events and deaths more impactful. Going back to Ri, it takes too long for the original cast to get back together and become the main characters again. Getting rid of the characters we've grown attached to and replacing them with new and less interesting ones is not a good move. It feels like we aren't watching or reading the same story anymore. Ri also completely changes the story's focus. Before, it was about ghouls trying to survive in a world where doves and other ghouls are trying to kill them. The second half of part 1 has Kaneki forming his own team to protect his loved ones and strike back at the opposition. It's all about the ongoing war between ghouls and doves, with the former protecting themselves from the latter. Nishiki and his girlfriend, and Kaneki and Amon's dynamic, which I'll get to next, also hint that there might be a way for humans and ghouls to live together peacefully. In Ri, however, the story is about CCG members with ghoul powers doing their job. This huge shift adds to the alienation of the audience. The last thing that Ri did that made it disappointing was he got rid of the powerful Kaneki and Amon dynamic. Both were new to being a ghoul and dove respectively, thus they were open-minded about the other situation. At the end of part 1, they both respect each other, but are forced to fight to protect their loved ones. In Ri, not only does Kaneki forget everything for a long period of time, but Amon becomes a half-ghoul, who also has some memory loss. The former puts a hold on the dynamic, but the latter shatters it. This might be one of the worst offenses, because their dynamic never returns. While it could be argued that they took each other's roles, this development wasn't made by choice, and the dynamic isn't utilized by the author. In conclusion, the start of Tokyo Ghoul Ri is disappointing and alienating for a few, but powerful reasons. The main character and his arc are lost. Most of the important supporting characters from part 1 rarely appear, if ever. The focus of the story is lost, and so is the dynamic between Kaneki and Amon. While the protagonists, supporting characters, and story focus do eventually return, they take too long to return, and we are not given something equally as satisfying in its place. A few years ago, I made a video about how Bleach arcs could have been structured more like DBZ. I don't agree with everything I said, but I have found a story that does exactly that and more. That story is One Punch Man. Spoilers for the manga and webcomic ahead. There are two qualities that I want to analyze. The first is the arc structure. In Dragon Ball Z, once the action really starts, most of the arcs become back-to-back action, including all of the present characters. In my video on how Black Clover makes its fights, I bring up a strategy that allows battles to be extended. DBZ does that a lot too. In the Saiyan saga, there are two major battles, Goku and Piccolo versus Raditz, and the Z Fighters versus the Saiyans. In the second fight, there are so many different combatants entering and exiting the fight. First the Cybermen are dealt with, then Nappa starts fighting and beats Chiaotzu and Tien. Then Piccolo, Krillin, and Gohan team up against Nappa. When Goku appears, he beats Nappa, then fights Vegeta. During the second battle, Goku, Gohan, Krillin, and Yajirobe move in and out of the fight. The Frieza saga is pretty similar. This time the heroes are Goku, Vegeta, Krillin, Gohan, and Piccolo, and the villains are the henchmen, Dodoria, Zarbon, the Ginyu Force, and Frieza himself. Characters move in and out of the fights just like the Saiyan saga. The Android saga has the same structure to its battles and so on. This is a simple and pretty effective formula, and I talked about how powerful formulas can be in another video, but I think One Punch Man does this even better. First, I'll start with the arcs that use this formula. The Sea Monster, Alien Conquer, Monster Raid, Super Fight, Monster Association, and the Neo Heroes Uprising arc. Like DBZ, there are many heroes and villains fighting in one place. Combatants move in and out of fights, sometimes completing them, and sometimes having them interrupted. The first thing that OPM does better is the characters. The story often uses these battles to introduce and develop new and old characters. Many S-Class heroes first showed off their moves in the Alien Conquer arc, and the Monster Association arc, especially in the manga, has all these new heroes showing up and getting some spotlight. The Neo Heroes Uprising brings in new heroes from the main association and introduces important Neo heroes like Blue. During the Monster Raid arc, characters like Metal Bat and Garo are fleshed out. Super Fight fleshes out Suiryu, and the Monster Association does wonders for Garo's character. Tatsumaki and Fubuki get really good development during this arc as well. Darkshine and Garo are even given character arcs here, and what I've mentioned are only examples that stood out to me. The second thing that OPM does better with the arcs is that it often utilizes a large cast on both sides. Arcs like Alien Conquer and Monster Association include tons of characters. There's even a fight in the latter arc that contains 16 combatants at once. With such a vast amount of heroes and villains, OPM is able to create fodder to let target characters shine and create powerful characters that target characters will struggle against and potentially even lose. These longer arcs are exactly the super arcs that I've mentioned in previous videos. Several combatants on both sides with epic career-defining battles for individual characters. A common issue with DBZ is that only certain characters get to be cool. Personally, only Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, and maybe Trunks have career-defining battles on the hero side. Krillin, Piccolo, and every other human or lesser character don't get these. Of course, you could argue that Dragon Ball had some for the characters, but that was before the fighting style changed to flight and ki blasts, so I personally don't count them, especially with all the good opportunities that DBZ offers them. Most of the Z fighters fight in the Saiyan and Android saga, yet none of them get epic battles. Krillin, Gohan, and Piccolo fight in the Frieza saga, but none of them get epic battles once again. The second quality that OPM does better than DBZ is the over-the-top aspect. In DBZ, the things that the characters can do gets increasingly impressive and broken. Broken is not a compliment when I use it. While the things that the characters do can be considered cool, it completely ruins the power system. See my video on escalation. The fights lose any tactical investment when all that matters is speed and power. Things like planet-destroying blasts and higher levels of Super Saiyan are some examples of these problems. OPM has this overpowered aspect even more so than DBZ, but there are two things it does to lessen the drawbacks. The first is the fact that this is a comedy and parody story. It consciously takes battle manga and superhero powers and turns them up to 11. This would be a problem if the story always took itself seriously. OPM thankfully knows exactly what it is and leans into it. Its fights are simply a fun display of broken characters fighting equally or even more broken characters. This is the parody part. The audience isn't expecting to care about the logic of the battle mechanics. They just sit back and enjoy the overpowered spectacle. I believe the author knows exactly what he's doing, and the reason for that is not only the fact that the story is a comedy half the time, but because the level of nonsense that goes on. Several characters are stated to be regular humans, but can pull off superhuman feats with very little explanation. Metal Bat is able to get stronger through fighting spirit. Garo is able to copy fighting styles after seeing them once. Bob has a martial arts style that cuts people with sharp winds. Characters receive damage that should kill a human but still come out fine. King exists. Genos pulls out a new piece of technology out of nowhere in nearly every fight. And most importantly, the heroes almost never die, and you should never expect them to die. They just get badly injured and sent to the hospital. The story clearly doesn't take itself too seriously when it comes to the plot, but that doesn't mean it won't nail the themes and characters. So by not taking itself seriously and leaning into the parody, I could be more lenient on it than if it took itself completely seriously and still got broken characters. The second thing that OPM does to lessen the drawbacks is creating unique fighting styles. In DBZ, nearly every character fights with hand-to-hand combat, flight, and ki blasts. So when broken characters fight, it essentially plays out the same way. This isn't the case in OPM. Nearly every important character is given their own fighting style or unique abilities, and this makes each fight engaging, even without the logical mechanics. Just seeing how characters with different styles deal with each other creates a fresh fight each time. On the hero side, you have telekinesis, cyborg enhancements, samurai, ninja, martial artists with unique styles, mechs, zombies, and superhumans. On the monster side, you have metamorphosis, telekinesis, replication, a water body, energy blasts, elasticity, and much more. In conclusion, One Punch Man pulls off DBZ's formula better by including more characters in each arc, giving characters career-defining battles, not taking itself too seriously, and having unique fighting styles for each character. It takes the good and bad traits of DBZ and makes them all better. Chakra is one of the best power systems in anime and manga, but I want to use my unique view on power systems and balancing to go over its strengths and weaknesses. In early Naruto, especially part 1, Chakra was great. One of its strongest suits was how creative it was. There were several different categories of abilities: ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu, clanjutsu, kekkei, summoning, etc. Genjutsu was underused for most of the story, but the rest were done pretty well and created a powerful foundation. With what I've mentioned so far, summonings were like a ninja's trump card. They could summon an animal of varying sizes that would add its own jutsu to the ninja's artillery, and it worked very well. The elemental rock paper scissors was also a creative form of balance. Each element was weak against one element and strong against another, although large quantities of elements can overpower an element that it is weak to. I wish this part of the system was used more often because of how much potential it had. I really liked the execution, or the way the story wrote these abilities. One really cool thing about how the system was written towards the beginning was that strategy could beat raw power. Examples would be Naruto and Sasuke versus Zabuza, Shikamaru versus Temari, and Shikamaru versus Toyuya. Having a more destructive jutsu did not guarantee victory, and great strategy could overcome it. Another thing I really liked was how a character could main one jutsu as long as it was versatile. My favorite examples of this are early Minato and Obito. Early Minato only used flying Raijin, yet he was already one of the most powerful ninja, going up against the future Raikage and the 8 Tails Jinchuriki with just that jutsu alone. Obito almost only used Kamui and was such a powerful threat. Both of these ninja combined their jutsu with taijutsu, but it also goes to show that not only was a destructive power not necessary to be strong, but one versatile jutsu was more than enough to be strong. A character didn't need to be like Hiruzen or Orochimaru and learn several jutsu. Another really great form of execution was the 6 Paths of Pain. The Rinnegan was a powerful jutsu with many jutsu under it, but instead of giving all of these powers to one character, the story cleverly split it up among 6 different characters, with each only being able to use one jutsu. This greatly balanced what could have been a broken antagonist, because each pain isn't that difficult to take on in a 1v1. Half of the paths are only powerful when working together. The only ones that are truly dangerous alone are Deva, Animal, and Ashura, but even then, they aren't broken, because as stated before, they have only one ability. The last positive I want to talk about is escalation. Up until around the pain arc, the escalation was great. The Sasuke recovery arc is one of my favorite examples. Most of the members learn advanced techniques, but there is a clear drawback to them. Kiba learns a double-headed wolf, but he can't see while using it. Choji has the 3 pills, but they take up a lot of calories and almost kill him. Both of these also use up a lot of chakra. Sasuke had the curse mark, but it slowly allowed Orochimaru to take over his body. Naruto had the 9 tails, but it almost always caused troubles for his allies when he used it. Sage mode is the greatest power-up in Naruto. It boosted the user's basic jutsu, but it also had prices to pay. The user needed to be completely still while charging up natural energy, and the mode could only be held for a limited amount of time. While Chakra never got completely ruined, there were individual powers used by powerful characters that began to sully its quality. The first issue I have is minor, but that would be how Kekkei was demoted from a unique clan jutsu to mixing 2 elements together. That just made no sense, but I'll move on to more important issues. Susanoo was terrible. It was a near invincible jutsu that had virtually no weaknesses. As a jutsu, it made no sense. It is an avatar made out of chakra? How does one construct it and why is it so unbreakable? How much chakra does it take? Because I don't think I've ever seen a ninja run out of chakra from using it too much. Whenever Itachi or Sasuke's Susanoo faded, they were already draining their chakra with other jutsu beforehand. This started the concept of bigger is better for jutsu down the line. It is basically a summoning, except all of its capabilities stem directly from you, and it takes no damage. Summonings were balanced because you were basically getting outside help. This isn't the case for Susanoo. Summonings could also be injured and retreated after taking huge damage. Again, this is not the case for Susanoo. It's what I'll be calling a non-summoning. Furthermore, Susanoo's combat was uninteresting. The user stood in place while the avatar swung or fired his weapons. With summoning, the summoner could fight alongside their summoning. This jutsu is such an issue because of how many major players in the story use it: Sasuke, Itachi, and Madara. And sadly, most of Madara's fighting was made up of this horrible jutsu. The next issue is the Jinchuriki. Up until the pain arc, Naruto's use of the tailed beast was fine. Not only did the story try to limit how much he used it, but as I said before, it would often cause harm and be as problematic as it was helpful. Cost and reward. However, B was the catalyst of this problem because he eliminated the cost. He was friends with his beast and suffered no consequences from using its power. Naruto had a lot of chakra, but had to worry about Kurama taking over. B has a lot of chakra and can use Kyuki's powers however he likes, even turning into him on command. This is extremely unbalanced, which leads me to Kurama Chakra mode. I absolutely despise this mode. Not only is the form such an asspull, but like B, it gets rid of all Jinchuriki costs and only leaves the benefits, making it unbalanced. Even worse, Naruto's moveset becomes extremely lazy here. The first issue is the chakra arms. Since he can extend them and make so many, he can just stand in one place as the arms do everything. This is such a downgrade from his previous fighting style. The next problem is how he only uses Rasengan. He has so many unnecessary variations of Rasengan, and when you combine that with the chakra arms, you have a character who basically has long-range Rasengans and can make multiple at a time. Rasengan had the drawback of creating only one at a time or 2 in Sage mode. This is eliminated here. While I said it was cool for a character to have one versatile jutsu, Rasengan is not versatile. It is just an attack, and KCM Naruto doesn't use it very creatively, he simply attacks with it. Versatile would be Shadow Clone Jutsu or Transformation, but I digress. This form takes away from the diversity in Naruto's moveset and replaces it with something unbalanced, uncreative, and visually unappealing. In Naruto's fight against Pain, he had to manage his chakra, but with this form, he can just dump any amount of chakra into any attack. And lastly, KCM gives Naruto a non-summoning to match Sasuke's. Why can Kurama turn into a chakra avatar, but no other beast can? Who knows? My next problem is Hashirama's moveset. When he was summoned in part 1, his powers seemed reasonable, but then part 2 arrived. Hashirama was made to rival Madara, so when Madara's powers started becoming stupid and unbalanced like Susanoo, so did Hashirama's. Since Madara had a non-summoning in the form of Susanoo, Kishimoto decided that Hashirama needed one too, which was the wood golem. Again, it has the same issues as Susanoo, except it isn't invincible. When Madara could cover the Kyuubi and Susanoo armor, Hashirama just had to have his parallel, so he was given Sage Mode, and another non-summoning. Why does Hashirama have Sage Mode? What type of Sage Mode is it? Why does he have non-summons? Who knows? Next is the Ten-Tailed Jinchuriki form. First off, flight is extremely lazy. Not only does it have no costs or limits, not even chakra consumption, but it also makes fights less interesting. The second is the True Seeker orbs. These were incredibly lazy. They are orbs that can turn into almost anything, even a bomb. They have no noticeable costs or limits. The least the story could have done is give them a cooldown or have them run out, but no. The third and final issue is the fact that only Senjutsu and Taijutsu works on them. This advantage comes with no costs and no logical reason. Just another excuse to make the Jinchuriki more broken. My next problem is Late Minato. Earlier I complimented him for being so powerful with only one jutsu. Late Minato says screw that. This man is given the Nine Tails, KCM, and Sage Mode. Honestly, my problem isn't when did he get these, but the fact that the story thought that Minato couldn't fight like Obito with Kamui and decided to give him unnecessary and some broken power-ups. It feels like Chakra continued saying bigger is better. My last problem is Kaguya. She was broken with no limits. She had no hints at chakra consumption. Nearly none of her jutsus had built-in weaknesses, and she had the most broken jutsu in the story. All of these problems are solidified when she required a kryptonite to be defeated. A rare MacGuffin needed to be written into the story in order to defeat her. That is what I call a kryptonite, and it is a sign of bad writing. It means that the writer didn't properly balance a character, and this is a last-ditch effort to find a way to defeat them. Kaguya's kryptonite was the seals on Naruto and Sasuke's palms. Even worse, she wasn't defeated, just sealed. In conclusion, Chakra started off very well, and was doing mostly great until after the Pain arc. Most of Chakra's problems stem from a lack of balancing that the system used to have. Jutsu are given strengths without a worthy cost or weakness, and this creates problems in the fights and makes them less engaging and more poorly written. Nen is one of the greatest power systems, but I want to use my unique view on power systems to analyze it. Since Nen has a clear skill tree, I will start at the roots and make my way up. First, the basics. I mean the 4 principles and the advanced techniques. I've mentioned this before, but I think it is sort of a drawback. These basic moves are learnable for any Nen user. This becomes a problem because moves as simple as these could be characters' unique Hatsu, but instead are made available for everyone. I think this not only eliminates potential Hatsu, but also potential battle situations. First, potential Hatsu. Ko and Ryu are the best examples. These 2 advanced techniques are basically the same as most enhancers' Hatsu, so what's the point of being an enhancer when you can learn these moves and get mostly the same effect? Gon and Uvogin's Hatsu are basically stronger versions of this, giving them little versatility over someone who can use Ko, Ryu, and their own Hatsu. Next is potential battle situations. The potential for one fighter to have an invisible Hatsu against someone who can't see it is eliminated because all fighters can learn to cloak with In and see with Kyo. This is just one example, but to be fair, it does open up some doors too. A good example will be Kurapika vs Uvogin and his use of In. But since this type of strategy has rarely been used so far, these universal abilities close more doors than they open. Another minor issue is the concept of mana points or MP. Up until Knuckle explained all of these concepts, I wasn't too sure if Nen worked like Hamon, where you can create an unlimited amount, or if it worked like MP, where you had a certain amount and drained it with each use of Nen. It may have just been me, but I think the issue is attributed to the fact that the characters rarely, if ever, speak about or are shown running out of Nen when fighting. Next up are aura types. The concept is very creative, but not all parts hold up. The weakest link is Enhancer. I don't think I've seen a single creative ability from this type. All of them basically do the same thing, but to varying degrees. I also think Specialization is kind of weak due to how vague it is. One cool thing about aura types was how you could explain in detail how each Hatsu worked. And that brings me to compatibility and mixed Hatsu. The concept of compatibility is amazing but sadly underused. It is the only thing that makes Gon's Hatsu interesting. The idea that a character can use multiple types and incorporate that into their attacks is really cool and adds versatility. Single type techniques have created cool abilities like Killowas and Hisokas, but mixed types are the best written. Castro's double technique is a great example. First he has to conjure a clone, then he has to use manipulation in order to control it. Morel's purple haze has him transmuting his aura into smoke, and then manipulating it into different forms. Knuckles' Hatsu emits a mascot that can manipulate his target's nen. Shoot can conjure a bird cage and use manipulation to trap touched body parts inside of it. With just one type, techniques of the same category start to look the same, but when multiple types are involved, the process behind the move becomes so complex and intricate. There are a few reasons why I say it's underused. The first and most obvious is that not many characters have multiple types, much less techniques with multiple types. Even our two main characters rarely use this. Killua only has transmutation, and Gon only used scissors and paper a few times. He has still yet to mix 2 or more types into one attack. The second reason I say it is underused is because of the amount of Hatsu that could classify as multi-typed, but aren't. Razor's 14 Devils, Goreynu's Gorillas, Netero's Statue, and Killua's Godspeed are just a few examples of abilities that only have one type, but should have at least 2 when you use the logic of how abilities are constructed in Hunter x Hunter. The third reason I say this is because the surface of his potential is only being scratched. The most types in one move has been 3, even though there are 5 available types for all users. Also, this ties back to why I think specialization is weak. You can't understand or predict how a Hatsu under this type would be created, which means that it also can't be used in multi-typed moves. Now for weaknesses. The first is, like Chakra, the balancing of certain techniques down the line. I've already gone into detail on those in separate videos, so I won't repeat myself, but I will throw Netero and Finks into the unbalanced category. My next problem is the amount of weakly written abilities. With all the creative foundations laid out, I'd expect most of the powers to be stand levels of creative. There are some really creative ones, but there are also some unbelievably lame ones. Nearly every enhancer attack is lame, but there are also lame attacks outside of this category. Silva's Hatsu allows him to basically shoot ki blasts, and Zeno can make a small dragon out of his aura. Razor can throw an aura ball, like a ki blast. In the case of Razor, he at least has another ability, but characters in Hunter x Hunter not only have a limited amount of moves, usually maxing around 3, but it takes thought to create even the simplest of moves, so for such lame abilities to be created is a hindrance. Stands have their fair share of lame abilities, but there are also significantly more creative abilities than not. Hunter x Hunter doesn't have that many Hatsu yet, so having powers like these take up space is a stain in my opinion. Other weak abilities include Ramots, Sadaso, and Blasters. My last problem is Nen getting stronger after death. This would seem unproblematic, but it was clearly written in to be used. There have been 3 instances where it was used. The first is by Pito, but there are other worse problems going on at that moment, so the effects aren't as noticeable. The other 2 happen in the manga, and in both situations, a character benefits from the enhancement with virtually no costs. It has always functioned as a cheap and lazy power boost so far. In conclusion, Nen has a lot of creativity and untapped potential with its intricacies, but it also suffers from abilities lacking proper drawbacks and balance to them, along with some lame abilities. Devil Fruits is a power system I haven't really talked about. Like the rest of the series, I will use my unique view on balancing to analyze the power system. The first type of Devil Fruit is Paramecia. I personally split these into 2 categories, single power and multi-power fruits. I'll start with single power fruits. These offer the best powers that the story has. By the name, they obviously give the user one specific power. The concept of many of these is extremely creative. There are characters that can chop up their body, turn parts of their body into bombs, turn their body into blades, create wax, create strings, and many other unique abilities. Powers under this category tend to be unique even under the sphere of anime and manga. The story would use a bizarre concept as an ability and make it work. This was especially effective because in early One Piece, the story wasn't trying to create powerful opponents, so the creativity of the ability could be prioritized. And past the initial concept, Luffy's applications of his fruit are some of the most inventive stuff I've seen in stories. I'm obviously talking about his gears, mostly second and third since they don't involve haki. Then there's multi-powered Paramecias. These are fruits that give the user multiple disconnected powers that fall under the same umbrella or motif. Examples would be Law and Sugar's fruits. Within Law's room, he can cut things apart, switch the positions of things, levitate objects, and more. With her fruit, Sugar can turn people into toys, erase memories, make contracts, and pause her own aging. These are the only 2 I remember so far, but I fear that there are more to come because of their potential. My problem is that it abuses Paramecia's lack of a definition and comes off as very lazy in comparison. Getting multiple abilities rather than one is an unfair advantage that comes at no price. Big Mom's fruit also borders on this multi-power category, because while all of her abilities come back to manipulating souls, some of her applications are very loose in mechanics, like Prometheus or Zeus. Zoans are some of the most balanced fruits. They give the user the ability to transform halfway or completely into an animal, each with their own advantages. The trio from CP9 are the best examples of this. My issue with the fruit begins to arise with mythical Zoans. They give the characters beast transformations, along with extra powers, which feels like a deviation from the initial idea of Zoans and comes with no drawback. Like multi-powered paramecia, this seems like a result of power escalation. The last type is Logia, and this is easily the most problematic. Most Logia have the ability to turn the user into the element, meaning that they can make themselves untouchable. This particular ability is obviously overpowered. The fact that the story felt the need to create a whole nother power system just to combat this shows how big of a problem it was. Unless a fighter can find the element's natural weakness, like against Crocodile or Enel, they have no way of harming them. And on top of that, they generate and manipulate a nearly unlimited amount of their element. Sea Stone and the sea is also a weakness, but it's a weakness to all fruit users. The last topic is Awakening. So far, only Zoans and Paramecia have shown this ability. I'm fine with Zoans because it gives them enhanced physical abilities, but seemingly reduces their intelligence as well. Paramecia users gain the power to turn their surroundings into their fruit substance and manipulate it. Not only is the logic questionable, but it's unbalanced. The character that could turn his body into mochi now has the ability to turn other inanimate objects into mochi and control them. It's eerily close to the way Logias manipulate an element, and is an issue stemming from the improper handling of power escalation. I feel like Awakening in general takes away from the simplicity of the earlier devil fruits and is another method to create more and more powerful abilities. In conclusion, devil fruits started off really well, where the story wasn't trying to create destructive and powerful abilities. But as the story continued, like most battle manga, the power system and characters faced power escalation, and the simplicity and balance of the early concept began to take a hit. The powers, especially Paramecia, are still as creative as they were, just no longer as simple or balanced. Megumi vs Toji was short but badass. And finally, Yuji and Aoi vs Mahito is easily the best fight of the story so far. The way some of these fights are resolved is kinda interesting. For example, the Chozo fight, the Dagon fight, and the Toji fight don't simply end by the hero surpassing the villain. Chozo wins against Yuji, but he's interrupted by memories. Toji comes out of nowhere and saves everyone from Dagon, and Toji's soul takes over and commits suicide to stop fighting his son. I really appreciate how the fights give the characters permanent damage. Naobito gets his arm cut off and is later burnt by Gojo, along with Nanami and Maki. Yuji, Nobara, and Maki are all permanently scarred during this arc. Aoi and Inumaki lose their arms. Nanami is killed, and Naobito dies after the arc ends. It really drives home the weight of the arc. I mentioned Toji before, and I really like his and Sukuna's unpredictability. Toji is summoned by one of the enemy curse users to be a puppet, but he quickly takes over and starts fighting everyone he meets. His unpredictability adds excitement to the arc and was used very well. Sukuna's unpredictability was a mixed bag. I like how when he was summoned, he kills a whole bunch of people and causes trouble for the heroes, but at the same time, he does a lot for the heroes, which definitely bothers me. He's supposed to be an antagonist, yet he kills Jogo, Haruta, and even fights Mahoraga to save Megumi. The first two were especially weak decisions. For the last, we know that he's interested in Megumi, but we don't know why, so when reading this arc, it feels like a weak excuse to have Sukuna solve problems for the heroes. This arc had a lot of interesting new powers. New curse techniques like inverse, projection, and falling blossom emotion were cool. Yuji's strange ability to implant false memories into his opponent's head was shown before, but most people, including me, assumed that was just Todo being weird. If this is his curse technique, it would be pretty interesting, especially since it's not a physical attack. Megumi finally used Mahoraga after considering using it a couple of times in the past. His inability to control it created nice chaos for the story, like Toji. It even almost killed him, but due to Sukuna's unknown motives, his saving Megumi weakened the latter's suicidal last-ditch effort. Mahito using Black Flash and Spirit Body made me actually appreciate his character, and Yuji learning how to control Divergent Fist was cool as well. Finally, the intense rivalry between Yuji and Mahito was done very well. While I am a little upset that Mahito killed Nanami, the latter at least got a chance to kick some ass before kicking the bucket in this arc. Also, Mahito being the one to kill Nanami and almost kill Nobara, two people that Yuji was close to, just fueled his hatred for the curse and was good writing. I never really liked Mahito due to his attitude and design, but when he used the Spirit Body, showing that he has been getting stronger as well, and had no fear using domain expansion on Sukuna, I really gained respect for him. He looked badass with the Spirit Body and even had parallels to Yuji, making them look even more like battle manga rivals. Yuji even says that both of them are the same. I also love Todo coming in to support Yuji during the fight, emotionally and physically. It drives home their brotherly bond. Now for the bad. While I like that they sealed Gojo, the fact that they needed a powerful MacGuffin to do so, basically a kryptonite, was bad. This is mostly an issue with Gojo's balancing and not the arc itself. The next problem is Nobara failing. She's presented as a competent sorcerer and got nearly as much screen time as Megumi up until now. She's supposed to be the third main character, yet she keeps failing. Her win-loss record was already questionable before this arc, but this one made it worse. While her teammates are kicking ass in multiple fights, she loses both of her only fights in this arc, needing to be saved both times. This wouldn't be as bad if her record wasn't already mediocre. As of now, her losses outweigh her wins, and two of her wins were team battles. I don't think she's won a single battle on her own, and she gets 2 chances in this arc but loses both of them. It honestly would have been better if she just didn't fight at all in this arc. This leads me to my next point. While the arc had a lot of fights, many of them were given to just a few characters, while several others were sidelined. During the incident, Todo was the only character to get a proper fight from Kyoto. Everyone else was absent for most of the arc and just gotten a few shots at the very end. For Tokyo, I'm fine with Panda not fighting because he already had a solo fight before, but Inumaki hasn't, so that was a little disappointing, especially since he was heavily wounded off screen. Sukuna helping the heroes was another problem, but I already mentioned that. My next issue was the Mahito rivalry was not concluded in a satisfactory manner. Everything was going so well. All the story had to do was make Yuji kill Mahito, but instead, Geto shows up and absorbs Mahito. I don't know if he'll come back, but if this is the end, that was a missed opportunity. Finally, the ending of the arc felt very rushed. Big reveals happened so quickly. A bunch of characters showed up in one spot and started fighting, and then Yuki, a new character, shows up and saves the day like a Deus Ex Machina. She was technically shown in a flashback before, but she had never appeared in the present, and this felt so unsatisfying. Having a character like Okotsu show up may have still felt a little cheap, but it would have been much better since we know him from the prequel and he's been mentioned before. Even Kenji Hakari would have been a better savior, because he was mentioned early in the story as a third tier who could surpass Gojo along with Okotsu. There's so much dialogue and exposition, and then the story cuts away just as Geto is leaving. The next chapter skips forward and tells you the aftermath. This was so abrupt and unsatisfying for such an amazing arc. In conclusion, the arc was great because it mostly did its job as a super arc, capitalized upon the steadily building rivalry between Yuji and Mahito, had amazing fights with creative abilities, and a nice touch of chaos to keep things unpredictable. Why does power escalation exist? In a story, as the plot moves forward, the stakes are expected to increase. This makes sense. If our main character is facing challenges that are on the same level or easier than the last, we as an audience have no reason to fear if he will succeed or not. A good writer usually wants to have their audience question whether the main character will succeed or fail. This creates suspense or tension and has us wanting to know what happens next. Even though I personally am always about 90% sure that the MC will be victorious, there's still that 10% chance that he might fail, and that keeps me engaged. If I feel like he has no chance of losing, my interest dwindles. Now, the plot is failing to keep me interested. However, the themes and characters can keep me interested. But why would a writer intentionally handicap themselves like this? So if our MC goes through 3 tasks in their story, it is general practice to make each task more challenging than the last. If all 3 tasks are the same level of difficulty, or they decrease in difficulty, after I've seen him pass the first one, I no longer have that 10% chance in my mind. I know he will pass the rest. So with all of that said, it makes sense how this applies to battle manga. In the battle subgenre, conflict is usually solved through battles. The type of battle is usually fought out with martial arts or a power system. So following the increase in conflict and stakes, the antagonist will get increasingly stronger or more will be at stake. I completely understand why manga and anime continue to do this up until today, but a little bit of creativity can create less pressuring and problematic solutions. First, I want to tackle the antagonist. If my MC beats a level 3 villain, the next villain needs to be above level 3, otherwise I have no doubt that he can win. As I said in my video on balancing, there's nothing wrong with power escalation as long as it's managed correctly. But if you can get a little creative, you can tackle escalation differently. Instead of relying on levels, you can rely on puzzles. I'll call this the puzzle method. In the most basic form, this can be found in rurouni kenshin. Several villains have a puzzle that kenshin has to solve in order to win the battle. With this method, the villains don't need to get stronger because the puzzles aren't linear. A world-ending threat is objectively greater than a city-ending threat, but a fighter with short weapons is not objectively greater than a fighter with illusionary striped arms. This method works best when all fighters are around the same power level, and the puzzle is what drives the fight. The most complex version of this is stand battles from JoJo. The best example would be the fight against the Darby brothers. They posed challenges that were completely puzzle-based and had no combat or strength. The fights had to be won primarily with intelligence. There are several fights that are in between Kenshin and JoJo. Most good power systems have a mix of combat and puzzle solving. The escalation of stakes can still be applied to the puzzle method. Each puzzle can get increasingly difficult. That way battles don't require the characters to get physically stronger. Instead, the characters have to think harder. The escalation of the puzzle can also be combined with the escalation of power, but regardless of the approach, I can't think of an example where the puzzle method would have negative effects on the story. Now I want to look at consequences and stakes. If our MC saves a city and then a country, why would I have any doubt whether or not he could save a single person? Additionally, the consequences of one person dying isn't as high as a city or a country at risk. In most cases, I wouldn't care, but there is still a way for me to be invested in this downgrade of stakes, and that is if they are personal. If this single person is the MC's brother that we've known since the start of the story, assuming the story is well written, I could care about this conflict more than the city or the country conflict. And because this conflict is so personal to the MC, there's a good chance that he will be more emotionally invested into the battle than the past ones, which will then usually spread to me. In this personal method, the villain doesn't need to be stronger than the MC, they just need to have the potential to harm the MC's brother. Because even if the MC defeats the villain, if the brother is still killed, it will be ultimately a loss for him. So in the city conflict, our question is whether the MC can beat the city-ending villain. But in the personal conflict, we know that the MC can beat the villain, so our question is whether he can save his brother's life. A great example of this is at the end of Parasyte. Spoiler alert. After Shinichi had already defeated the strongest Parasyte, there was one more battle. Murano, Shinichi's love interest, is captured by a death row criminal who is threatening to kill her. While Shinichi doesn't have Miki, he's still superhuman, so we know he can win. But we are invested because we are worried whether Murano will survive or not. Making stakes more personal can be as strong as or even stronger than making the stakes bigger. Stories can juggle these types of stakes instead of relying on conflict being bigger and badder. A writer can switch between these types or even mix them. I also understand why the puzzle method and personal method are not used as frequently. It's about ease. It's a lot easier to make my next antagonist physically superior than the last and have the MC train hard or get a power up in order to defeat him. But if I keep repeating this cycle, the balancing will break and things will get out of hand. The plot will be negatively affected because of this. If I keep making my opponent stronger, the MC will become too strong, and the only way for me to give him a challenging opponent is by introducing an even stronger opponent. There's no turning back. However, if I strictly use the puzzle method, the worst that can happen is I create a puzzle that is too complicated for the audience to understand, creating an unsatisfactory fight. But at least I have room to recover. I can always just make the next opponent have a more solvable puzzle, because as I said before, there aren't always levels to puzzles. They aren't always linear. Solving puzzle A doesn't automatically mean you can now solve puzzle B. As for stakes, it's easier for me to keep increasing the scale of what's at stake. I can just go from one person to more people to even more people. The downsides of this are big though. I have to keep creating larger and larger threats that have the power to destroy more. And once I take the next step, I can't go back by only using this strategy. However, if I use the personal method, the worst that can happen is that I jam in a new character that is apparently more personal to the MC than the last. but I personally find this mistake very easy to avoid. A little bit of planning will keep you far away from this point, and like the puzzle method, the negative effects on the plot are very contained. After I introduce this forced character, I can make the next conflict around an even more personal character that has been around for enough time. In conclusion, escalation is kind of necessary, but getting creative with writing and using things like the puzzle method and personal method can solve a lot of battle manga escalation problems. I have a slight issue with tournament arcs and training arcs. This is because of how they handle conflict and consequence. But I'll start with stories in general. All stories require conflict to make the plot interesting. A story without conflict goes nowhere. Conflict can come in many shapes and forms. When the level of conflict increases, so should the level of consequences. Consequence is necessary to show the stakes, the weight of the plot, and the character's actions. If characters don't face any consequences, the conflict feels too weak and easy to solve. It is underwhelming and unsatisfying. Here are some examples of negative consequences in different types of scenarios. In battle, natural consequences are injuries and even death. So in a battle story, injury and death should be common consequences, especially in high stakes. This should be amplified if characters have superpowers. In sports, consequences are getting knocked out of a tournament, loss on a record, or even sadness. This should be the same in stories. In romance, consequences are rejection and emotional pain. All of these consequences will usually also happen in a story that includes these scenarios as conflict. I take issue with stories that don't have a high enough level of consequence for their conflict. In a battle manga, when characters don't die and or sustain big injuries, especially when the stakes are high, it is comparable to a sports manga where when the characters lose, they don't get kicked out of a tournament, their loss doesn't go on their record, and they don't feel any sadness or anger. Imagine a romance manga where when the main characters are rejected or their love interest is stolen, they don't feel any sadness or a rift or awkwardness in any relationships involved with the romance. None of these examples feel realistic or satisfying. Who faces the consequences is also important. The consequences should happen to main characters or important supporting characters. If background characters die in a battle manga, it gives the audience an idea of what's at stake, but not nearly as well as killing an important character. If conflict happens, but only background characters die or get hurt, and no one important does, the stakes of the consequence don't register with the audience very well. Since we are in the perspective of the important characters, the conflict won't feel as dire as the author intended it to be. It's like irrelevant teams losing in sports, but none of the main teams, or background characters getting rejected and heartbroken, but none of the main characters. It can happen to background characters too, but consequences on background characters have less weight and impact than on main ones. With that out of the way, I'll start with tournaments. The first problem with tournaments is that they are a form of manufactured enforced conflict. Characters are forced to fight each other with no other motive than to win the tournament. The conflict doesn't arise naturally. The second problem is that they usually take place in a controlled environment. This means that the stakes aren't high, because the referee will step in if things become too dangerous. Additionally, this makes the plot predictable and formulaic, because there are rules that all combatants must follow. We know that a specific amount of characters will face off in a specific ring. We know that no one will be allowed to die, and that the winner moves on while the loser is disqualified. There's almost no room for unpredictability. The third problem is that tournaments pause the plot. From the audience's perspective, the world comes to a halt until the tournament finishes, putting the arc in a bubble separate from the plot. The characters may develop, but the overarching plot stands still, and the plot within the tournament is barely existent because of the formulaic structure, and the fact that it basically happens in a bubble. We are watching characters be forced to fight one another with little to no plot in a safe environment. Tournament arcs are also long because they include many characters, so all of these flaws drag even longer. But tournaments are still cool and have their benefits. They display a lot of fights, give a reason for two characters who wouldn't normally fight each other to fight, and can effectively introduce many characters, which is why I'm fine with one tournament per story. Personally, it's also a better idea to have a tournament arc towards the beginning, because the stakes are usually low and there isn't much plot to push forward. There are some examples of tournament arcs that have managed to get around some of these drawbacks. The best one is Yu Yu Hakusho's Dark Tournament. This gets around the low stakes and consequences because the characters can and often do die during their battles. Additionally, if Yusuke loses, Tokuro will kill him and his loved ones. This makes the stakes as high as any regular arc. Naruto's tournament section of the chunin exams also uses the possibility of death to reduce the stake problem, but it doesn't do it as well as Yu Yu, because not nearly as many fights result in deaths. In the final round of Yu Yu Hakusho, all 4 of the matches result in the death of a character, although older Tokuro comes back the next arc. But there is one thing that Naruto does that Yu Yu Hakusho doesn't, and that's interrupting the tournament with plot. This had been building up throughout the arc and finally happened during Sasuke vs Gaara. This is something that counters the problem of the plot coming to a halt by stopping the tournament and starting the plot, which is more interesting. Stakes and unpredictability came back, and the tournament arc was able to conclude in a more satisfying way than if it had just finished the tournament. Earlier, I said that I'm fine with only one tournament, but Yu Yu Hakusho is the only anime with 3 tournaments that doesn't really bother me, and the reasons are because of how they all attempt to avoid and reduce the flaws of a tournament arc. Genkai's tournament is the first one. This is extremely short, most of the battles are also quick, and the number of contestants are small. This avoids the length problem and allows the other flaws to last for a very short period of time. The second is the Dark Tournament, which I already talked about. The third was in the Three Kings Saga. This tournament, while having a lot of characters, has short fights, and the overall tournament is shown in fragments, skipping over the not so important parts. Only around 4 1v1s were shown. Yomi versus his son, Kurama's fight, Hiei's fight, and Yusuke versus Yomi. The last was the longest fight, but even that was kinda short compared to the Dark Tournament's fights. So like Genkai's tournament, it reduced the other issues by reducing the amount of time spent on the arc. Furthermore, the tournament is only the second half of the saga. The first half actually had plot and character development. This reduces the plot problem. 3 tournaments is still too much, but Yu Yu Hakusho found a way to manage. Finally, training arcs. For me, training included in an arc is different from a training arc. Stories like Fairy Tail, Naruto, Yu Yu Hakusho, and Bleach have no training arcs because no arc is solely based on training. Training arcs are like tournament arcs, but worse. They have every single problem that a tournament arc has, except for length. They also have the added problem of a lack of motivation. In a tournament arc, characters at least have the motivation of rank, approval, or money. In training arcs, there is no motivation to win outside of competitiveness and self-improvement, which is very weak. The stakes are also lower. In a tourney, the characters would be kicked out for losing, but there is usually no penalty for losing here, and if there was, it wouldn't be as large. Furthermore, tournaments had the benefit of introducing new characters, but training arcs usually don't have this. They use already known characters. Jujutsu Kaisen is a manga that has managed to avoid some of the flaws of training arcs. The best problem it avoids is the plot problem. JJK avoided this by having Gojo actually use primary antagonists to teach Yuji. The plot was moving forward as the training happened. This also means that the stakes somewhat came back. Although Gojo was too powerful for anyone to be in danger, there was at least a possibility that something could go wrong and create a consequence since it wasn't a controlled setting. It also avoided the problem of manufactured conflict because Gojo was actually attacked by the villains. He just used it as a chance to train Yuji. This is an example of a good arc dedicated to training. In conclusion, conflict and consequence are important and should match each other's level. Tournament and training arcs also have an issue with conflict, consequence, and more because they are in a natural form of conflict, have a low level of conflict, are too predictable and static, pause the plot, and are long, which extends all of these problems. I like Hunter x Hunter, but I don't like the length some fans will go to praise it. I have seen a lot of praises that are inaccurate and false, and I think it will be interesting to look at them and break them down. The first praise is that Hunter x Hunter is a deconstruction. Every time I hear this, I feel secondhand embarrassment, because the person saying this doesn't know what a deconstruction is, and to be honest, neither do I, but I know what it's not. Most people use the incorrect TV tropes definition, which is basically subverting the tropes of a genre and putting them in a darker or more realistic light. That's not a deconstruction. People use this as a buzzword to sound smart. What's worse is that simply subverting tropes is not enough to warrant a compliment. If an author subverts a trope, but their writing is bad, would you still praise them? Execution is what's important. If you want to get a headache reading the deconstruction nonsense for Hunter x Hunter, go to TV Tropes Deconstructor Fleet for Hunter x Hunter. The second praise is that the story is so subversive. I've already explained why simply subverting is not enough to warrant praise, but Hunter x Hunter isn't that subversive in comparison to other manga in the battle genre. It occasionally does subvert tropes. For example, the heroes don't have to forcibly free Killua in what looked like a rescue arc. The heroes don't make it to the top of the Heavens Arena. York New City doesn't end with a big battle. Whether you like these differences or not is up to your tastes, but none of it makes it inherently better. Now for examples of Hunter x Hunter being played straight. There is a power system that has become one of the most influential in battle manga. A lot of characters use martial arts along with their powers. Fights that use the power system and martial arts are the main way conflict is resolved. Conversation and understanding can also be used to resolve conflict. The characters have to take an entrance exam to gain entrance into the main profession. There is an arc revolving around a martial arts tournament. It has training sessions. Arcs like Heaven's Arena, Greed Island, and Chimera Ant end with a big fight. There is a rescue arc where an ally is taken from them and the heroes have to rescue them. This last one is the most infuriating one because I've heard it be called a subversion when battle manga before and after have used this. This trope is a negative or dark transformation. Yusuke has his Mazoku form. Kenshin has his Batosai form, Inuyasha has his demon form, all three came before. Ichigo has his full hollow form against Ulquiorra, and Naruto arguably has his four-tailed and higher forms. Most of these tropes can be seen in the big three, which people use as a measure of genericness for battle manga. So if Hunter x Hunter has a lot in common with them, how subversive is it really? The third praise is that the story is somehow darker than other battle manga. For a few examples from other battle manga, JoJo's has main characters dying in nearly every part. Yu Yu Hakusho has audience members in the Dark Tournament being killed, the Game Master Kid being killed by Kurama, and Kurama vs Elder Toguro. One Piece has Arlong shooting Nami's mother, and Robin's entire past. Naruto has the Uchiha Massacre and the Forest of Death. Bleach has Mayuri vs Appu, and the entire 1000-year Blood War arc. The only thing that makes Hunter x Hunter a little eerie is how Gon doesn't really acknowledge or pay attention to any of the deaths at the start, making an uncomfortable contrast between the tone of the story and what's happening. Additionally, the Chimera Ant arc is one of the most positive arcs in battle manga. It rewards characters who show honesty, friendship, honor, and truthfulness. See my analysis on that arc for more details. The fourth is a more personal and minor issue, and that is how people overhype the power system. Nen and Stans kind of get a special treatment from fans, and they're spoken about like they're one of a kind, even though there are similar and equally creative power systems out there. People are quick to point out flaws in other power systems, but these two are protected. But I've already spoken on the unsung flaws of the power systems enough in my other videos. In conclusion, in comparison to other battle manga, Hunter x Hunter is not a deconstruction. It is only a little subversive, it's not dark, and its power system isn't that one of a kind. The message is that you don't need to make things up in order to praise your favorite manga. Hunter x Hunter may not be as different from its contemporaries as people make it out to be, but that doesn't make it any worse. Being different doesn't automatically make a manga good. A manga can be filled with tropes and very little originality, but if the plot, characters, setting, and themes are written masterfully, it will still be amazing, which Hunter x Hunter is. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.